questions from you guys. I have some questions if you registered. We have a list of questions, but we'll get to those after. Why don't we start with ones that you guys might have? Anyone? Yes, go ahead.
On those increased catch rates you saw in the oil spill in the estuary, have you considered that maybe it might not be as the fish have gotten more abundant, maybe habitat is degraded so that they're not as able to evade your equipment?
Yeah.
Sorry, repeat, yes. Thank you.
So the question is, I think you nod, if the oil spill like whacked the habitat and compressed the habitat, reduced the amount of habitat, would the fishes then pile into the remaining habitat, and therefore we see higher abundances where we sample?
Yes.
So, you know, people have thought about that, especially in the sense of the low oxygen zone off of Louisiana. If it expanded, those fish are going to seek refuge somewhere. That seems like a reasonable question and totally in play. For these fishes that are using seagrass as their nurseries where we sampled, there's no evidence that seagrass shrank. And these are not fishes that typically are going to be, as juveniles or post-larvae, are going to be offshore and in the estuaries. They're pretty much in the estuaries. So I don't think that's a big part of it. What I do think is notable is the oil spill waxed the marsh in Louisiana. And pretty quickly, the plants died, the marsh eroded away, and now you're back to a border that has marsh on it, right? And so then we show up sometime later and we throw our traps out at the edge of the marsh, right? And so we're not really sampling an oil site, we're sampling 10 meters from where the oil was. And that 10 meters is a big difference, right? And so, like, if you keep walking back the Louisiana marshes, if you go sample the edges, you're always going to see the same density at that edge, but now you've got a lot less of that edge over time. And so I think that's kind of hidden in the data that we show too, but it's an important consideration. Now, the other thing is the marsh waxed some of the edge of the marshes and it eroded away. If you ask me, am I terribly concerned about that? My personal opinion is probably not, because the marshes are subsiding and that's your major problem with the marshes. It's not just a little erosion on the edge, it's the total subsidence of those marshes.
Next question.
Dr. Fody, this surge that you see in the post-spill reproduction, is that fairly atypical of similar occurrences that we see in natural disasters like hurricanes, where there's a surge of reproduction and so forth?
So the question is this response typical of big disturbances, perhaps after a hurricane or something like that? I'll answer a little more constrained, and that is just oil spills, because the first time that I saw these results, I was like, well, we're going to have to explain this in the context of all the other oil spills. This is an odd result. And then when you start looking at it, it's not an odd result. So the Arthur Kill oil spill up in New York, after that oil spill, the numbers of fungulus, mummy chog, if you're on the East Coast, they exploded. After the Santa Barbara oil spill in the 70s, the number of fishes went up. Even the Valdez oil spill. So there, they didn't see initial collapses of like the herring. The herring numbers went up. Now, 4 or 5 years later, the herring collapsed and it never recovered. Never recovered. And to this day, people debate what caused that. Like, was it tied to the oil spill pretty directly, or was it really indirectly? But after oil spills, if you look, panoramically, globally, just the oil spill in the Galapagos, for whatever reason, you often see the numbers of fish, at least, not everything, just fish, like go up. Now, what causes that is, I think, I'm not ready to give you an answer yet, but I do think it's something that you see. And in terms of like the general disturbance, if you knock out the big ones that are pretty rare, you might have 10 small ones that replace it, right? So I'm just showing you numbers, like not biomass. So if I were to plot biomass, it might look more stable. But if you kill off some of the dominant big ones and little ones come in to fill that niche, the numbers might go up. That would be one mechanism.
Along those lines, it seems like a lot of what you're talking about are early post-settlement stages or small fish like killifish. And I wonder if part of what's happening is in an oiled area, you killed off or drove out a lot of the predators, and they take longer to recover, classic predator-prey. trade cycle. That may be part of what we're seeing there.
Yeah, so the question or the comment was, if you whack the dolphins and the birds and the bigger fish, eat the little fish like we study, those bigger fish maybe have yet to recover, so there is less predation on the fish. That's why we're seeing bigger numbers. I mean, I think that's probably part of it. I think you're absolutely right.
Okay.
With your evidence of high mortality, obviously dolphins, but I don't very much in mortality. I don't think they those other things that eat the killifish. We have evidence of, high mortality in those predators.
No. In fact, we don't have evidence of high mortality of fungulates either. I mean, not in the wild. There's not not really a way to quantify that. Most of the fish, when they die, they sink or whatever.
Yeah, I would say that, for some of these fishes, so when I came down to Louisiana, I was laying on the dock, and I hear this snapping noise in the marsh, and I didn't know what it was. And 5 minutes later, I heard it again. And 5 minutes later, I heard it again. So now I'm looking every time I'm hearing this. And after about an hour, and I must have heard it 10 or 15 times, I finally saw it was a blue crab had caught a big fat cockatoe and was eating it. And that's not something I've seen on the East Coast. I think that's just interesting that you don't see on the East Coast. But here, every time I've been down, I see blue crabs eating fungicide fruits every time I'm in the marsh. And blue crabs haven't shown any population decline. So they're still there. The CMAP data, no one has told me that they've seen red drum or anything that they catch, maybe a different, assemblage of fishes for sure. But some of those things overlap, and no one's told me, I've asked, no one's told me that, yeah, there you see it. So they seem to also be kind of coming along. I do think people that study red snapper and vermilion snapper, I think they have seen a little bit different stories in terms of there have been maybe a recruitment failure here and there. Certainly with the red snapper, there were the lesions on the snapper that came after the oil spill, but that might be like the sublethal effects, that happens on the individual. So, we're only generally talking about estuarine fishes.
I was working with the Louisiana Seafood Board, and it still happens, and I was in the room when DP and announced they were going to use the dispersants. He was talking all about oil, but the fishermen have never said it was the oil that was going to cause problems. It's been the dispersants. Can you, has any of your studies shown that the dispersants are actually the problem, not the oil?
Repeat the question.
So the question was, are the dispersants more worrisome than the oil itself? I think that from what we have found is that if you just use dispersant alone, it's not very toxic. But when you combine dispersant with oil, the combined effect makes the oil more toxic, more bioavailable to the animal than just plain oil itself. So it increases the toxicity of the oil.
And to follow up on that, you said that there was no, on the blue crab, that the blue crab was, has shown no, the blue crab is down considerably, and the oyster field is set to recover. And the oystermen in Louisiana are blaming that on this person.
So the point was made about blue crab. So the graph at 80%, so you just identified the 20% where the studies have said there is an effect. So the oysters are interesting. My understanding is, someone can nod or correct, is that with the oysters, a big part of it may have been the freshwater diversion.
That's part of it.
The other thing that I'm not sure it's published yet, but I just saw the talk, the oil spill response. So as people went out to try to protect oysters with putting boom down, a study was done to survey places that you did that, like people walked around, trudged around, putting boom out. And like just the physical, and this is Sean Powers from the Dolphin Island Sea Lab. So places where, you try to protect the oysters, you may have loved it to death by going out and walking around and put a hurt on the reefs, so the aggregations, these muddy aggregations of oysters that are right up against like marshes like that. That was probably, the cure was worse than disease. And the same with the freshwater diversions perhaps.
One thing I have to interject. There are publications out on the table. This one is all about dispersants and their impact to aquatic animals, so take one on your way out. Anyway, I just had to put a plug. Emily, who's on our line, she's the one who lead author for this one, so Em, good job. Okay, any other questions? No? Okay, you sure? Nothing else pressing? Our speakers are going to be here for a little bit if you guys want to chat with them. So just a few things just to wrap up. The first thing is on those tables, there's some evaluations. I know everybody loves evaluations, but this is the only way we can improve what we're doing. So if you want to fill one out, please do. If not, we're going to email it to you. And so if you do not fill it out today, check your inbox. You can do it through email, but I need a promise that if you don't fill it out now, you're going to do it later. Okay, so that's the first thing, evaluations. Again, we have our publications out on the table if you guys want to grab them on your way out. I think there's some other things I was supposed to say. Well, yeah. Okay, and I guess the only other thing is a huge thank you to our speakers. And a really big thank you to all of you guys. We really appreciate you taking some time. I know you guys have had a long meeting for those that are here for the council meeting. And I guess that's it, Kelly. Thank you. Also, a big thank you to the council for helping us and allowing us to put this on and letting us email everybody and harass them to get them to come. So thank you guys. And then last thing, thank you, Kelly, for reminding me that's what it was, those clickers. So leave them on your table, give them to me, leave them on the way out. Just make sure you don't walk off with them because we will get in trouble. So with that, thank you guys so much. Our speakers are here, so feel free to come up and talk to them.